hand if you heard 3. Nobody? 2? Okay, more hands. 1. Lots more hands. Yeah. The bird song that probably most of you heard was the white-throated sparrow, which is a spring migrant currently making its way through New York City on its way to its breeding grounds in Canada. There was also an American robin, a feathered harbinger of spring, if ever there was one, and of course the classic and beautifully read northern cardinal. All 3 of these birds were in that recording, but if you had trouble hearing them, that's understandable. Imagine how much trouble they have hearing each other. But when they cut through that mix, that is a moment that I live for. I've been a birder since I was 3 years old, and when I hear that music, it just reminds me that there's another world out there, living on its own terms. And for that one moment, I'm brought out of my day-to-day routines and immersed in this world of birds that I've always loved. And I almost owe it to myself to go find the source of the sound. Unfortunately, opportunities to do this are becoming increasingly rare. In the 1800s, in 1800, the human population largely didn't live in cities. Only 3% of us lived in urban settlements. But now, it's well on its way to 60%. That's the figure estimate by 2025. In fact, if you live in a developed nation like the United States and you don't live in a city, you're already in the minority. We like to think of birds as infinitely adaptable creatures bestowed with the gift of flight. They can live almost anywhere. They do travel all over the world. However, they're not as adaptable as you may think. In fact, only a select handful of birds can really adapt to life in a city. There have been some studies that have shown how birds can adjust the frequency of their calls to be heard above the backgrounds of city noises. But the vast majority are physiologically or behaviorally incapable of adapting to this kind of urban lifestyle. As a birder living in New York, I want to find a way to bring them back. New York City is alive with sound. It's part of why I moved here 2 years ago. I wanted to join the professional beatbox scene. When I arrived here, I found myself immersed in an urban symphony of human-made and mechanical sounds. A veritable panoply of things just assaulted my ears, and it was very stimulating and occasionally overwhelming, I'll admit. But nevertheless, I felt very at home walking around practicing beatbox routines on the street. How's it going? It seemed totally natural to me. No one really batted an eye. Well, a few people looked. It was a little awkward. But as a birder, I knew that some sounds were missing from that urban symphony. Originally, I wanted to apply my own vocal acrobatics to see if I could bring them into the picture. I started imitating birds, familiar species at first, like the mourning dove. Then I started combining it with beatbox. And then I migrated to other bird songs, like the American bittern, for example, which coincidentally had a sound that already sort of resembled another that was in my beatbox vocabulary. You can see it has this very long neck, and what it does is claps its bill and gulps in air and inflates an air sac on its chest to then kind of squeeze like a bagpipe. And it sounds like this. Take the first half of that sound. Thank you. Those vocal acrobatics were fun, but they weren't enough. I wanted to be in concert with the birds themselves. My passion for ornithology had reasserted itself on my urban existence with a renewed sense of urgency. And so I sought about getting a collection of bird songs together from the wild. I started about 8 months ago, and since I've recorded about 25 songs and published 15 of them. And in the process have learned that there are 5 concrete steps that I always go through to record bird sound. The first is to narrow your focus. There are over 10,000 bird species in the world today. That's quite a large swath of things to choose from. So you can divide it a number of different ways. You can focus in on, say, habitats like mountains or rivers and streams or the rainforest, although that last one is maybe inadvisable as your starting point. there are over 1,500 species of birds living in the Amazon basin alone. That doesn't really narrow it down. So maybe you could start with the birds of Central Park or of New York State. The next dimension of limiting could maybe occur with a family of birds. You could work with vultures or parrots or finches or warblers. The list goes on. Or if you really want to get down and dirty, you can focus on one species in particular. A good example is the superb lyrebird of southern Australia. You may have heard of it as the bird that sounds like a chainsaw. Well, as a vocal acrobat, I get asked pretty much once a week if I've heard of this thing. Yes, I have. It's sort of an inspiration of mine. I kind of want to be one. It's not really a secret anymore. And what makes it so amazing and what makes it able to imitate so many different sounds is that naturally it actually incorporates as many as 20 other songs from birds in its habitat into its repertoire, and it nails them. Dead on. The other birds even get fooled. It's one of the most amazing mimics in the animal kingdom. But this brings me to step 2, because the superb lyrebird lives in southern Australia. I love gathering my own sounds from the field, but sometimes the best ones require a prohibitively expensive plane ticket. When you're faced with that kind of conundrum, you can turn to online tools for help. I like to use the Macaulay Sound Library from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. It has over 175,000 bird recordings, representing 75% of the world's birds. That's just an incredible number. Each of these recordings has a lot of detail kind of buried, not just in the sound, but in the notations. It can tell you what time of year and what time of day it was recorded, where, down to a geolocation with coordinates, and of course what the species is doing. A lot of times the notations will even include whispering from the recordist into the microphone. They'll talk about seeing mute swans just over there. And they were really nervous for a second, but I think they've calmed down. And there are 5 swans altogether. The babies are learning how to feed for the first time. And it's all kinds of adorable. That brings me to step 3, which is to let nature lead. One of the most incredible things about birdsong is the diversity and natural musicality of these sounds. You can start off by composing maybe with certain ideas in mind, but all the sounds you're hearing from my voice and from the bird voices that I'm going to play today have no effects applied to them at all. I'll apply some probably in the live performance, but ultimately what you're hearing and what you're getting for the first time is the natural sound, simply excerpted from a larger field recording. But in doing so, you're also giving a sufficient amount of space to let these voices shine through the mix. And when you want to start off, maybe you can choose some simple sounds. If you want your kick drum, it can be the ruffed grouse. That's the sound of a ruffed grouse male beating its wings together to attract a mate. If you want bongos, you can work with woodpeckers. Or if you want trumpets, you can use trumpeter swans. But a lot of other sounds defy classification this way. In fact, it's really not fair to anthropomorphize birdsong as a kind of human music in its own subsection. It's really its own world of communication. You can find sounds that are totally from a different universe, like the hiss quack of the male gadwall duck calling to a mate. That's a duck. I still can't get over that. It's not your quack quack. It's a totally different sound. You can fall in love with the endearing chime of the sorrel rail. Or you can listen to the flight calls of a mute swan, which is just an incredible sound. I absolutely love it. Flying overhead. There's a natural musicality in all of these sounds. And that brings me to step 4, which is to give each of these voices its own place in the mix. Ultimately, you don't want them to be muddied and stacked on top of each other from a producer's point of view, but simultaneously, you're working with language here. All of these sounds have explicit meaning in the bird world. They can be used to defend territory against rival males or females. They can be used to communicate within a bird family. Once you've given that language a chance to shine through, you're really tapping into the evolutionary roots, not just of human communication, but also human vocal expression. All animal sounds are part of this same evolutionary track. And by going back to the world of birds, I hope I can bring you to phase 5, which is to play the music and create that world. All the sounds you're going to hear from me today are played in real time, and On the video screen here, you're going to see each bird's image actually appearing in real time with its sound. So you can see as well as listen. I hope you enjoy. We're going to move across the ocean now. Oh! Reverse! 3, 4. Thank you very much. I'm very excited to continue bird boxing. It's a new passion of mine, and it's a fusion of two things that I really love, beatboxing and bird watching. Sound and music really transcends that barrier between rural and urban environments. And if you think about the implications we can draw from having this kind of music available to other people, imagine what it must be like for someone who's never walked on the beach or hiked in the mountains to suddenly hear what it might sound like to go there. By bringing the sounds into our urban environment, making them a part of that urban symphony, hopefully we can inspire people to learn about the actual sources of the sound. And ultimately, if we let that music permeate this urban existence, we can be inspired to protect what's out there before the sounds are all that we have left. Thank you very much.